So I've been studying, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be here today and talking about this. I've been studying conversation and its role in our lives for about 5 years now. Arguably, I've been studying it for a lot longer than this, but focusing on conversation for 5 years. And what have I found out? I've found out that conversation is the most human and humanizing thing that we do, and that we're not doing enough of it because our technology is kind of taking us elsewhere. I found out, as I said in my opening remarks, that it's where empathy is born, and I found out that it's part of a virtuous circle. Empathy is part of that circle, but the circle doesn't end there, because conversations with others, where the conversations where empathy is born, advance self-reflection. Those are the conversations with ourselves that begin during development, but that continue through life. So conversation, self-reflection, creativity, productivity, they're all kind of woven together in this virtuous circle that includes conversation, empathy, and self-reflection. But these days, we have so many ways of connecting, that usually without noticing, it's not as though somebody says, I'm going to stop that self-reflection and empathy stuff. It's not like that. Just usually without noticing, we begin to find ways around conversation. So we send an email or a text instead of talking face-to-face. We don't apologize. This is very big. We don't apologize face-to-face, but we type, "I'm sorry," and we hit send. Now, why? We say convenience, but what's behind that? There are kind of other reasons. It's not just convenience. We like to edit, and this is so big, we like to edit our words before we send them. We have this fantasy from the earliest ages. We have this fantasy that we can get things right. We like to have our communications when we think we have time for them. We're so overwhelmed that we like to feel we can be less overwhelmed if we can kind of time shift our lives, and we can time shift our lives if we can control our time, and electronic communications, a way of controlling our time. So it all adds up to a flight from conversation, at least from the kinds of conversation, because people are obviously still talking, but it adds up to a flight from a certain kind of conversation. And those are, again, open-ended, spontaneous, where you let yourself be vulnerable. And it turns out that we run into trouble when those kinds of conversations become fewer and further between, because those are the conversations where empathy is born, creativity, self-knowledge. There's a thriving of business success, creativity, productivity. It's in those more spontaneous, open-ended, vulnerable conversations where those kinds of things happen most readily. A point of terminology, I use the term the robotic moment, because I think we're in the robotic moment. But I want to make it clear that it's not because we've already built all of these robots that are there and can be our friends. It's because we are ready for them, which is a big distinction. It's not because I'm saying that all these robots that are about to be marketed to you as friends and companions really can be your friends and companions. We are at the robotic moment because we're kind of, oh, really? A robot that can babysit my child? Hey, yeah, I'll try that. That's the robotic moment. It's a moment of our readiness, not the fact that the robots are really ready, in my terms, to take on this role. So I've said we're at the robotic moment, not because we've made a machine or a robot that could be a friend, but because we're willing to accept what machines can offer as sufficient unto the day. And even before we make the robots, we remake ourselves as people who are ready to be their companions. And there you get my title. Who do we become when we talk to machines or contemplate this new kind of talking to machines? What do we forget when we talk to machines or contemplate this new kind of talking to machines? And how can we remember ourselves? So those are the things that I'm going to be talking about today. So let me begin with a story. I was recently on a radio show about Siri with a panel of engineers and social scientists, and the topic turned to how much people love to talk to Siri. Part of the general phenomenon that people feel uninhibited when they talk to a machine because they like the feeling of no judgment. One of the social scientists on the program, actually a psychiatrist, suggested that soon a souped up and somewhat smoothed out Siri would soon be able to serve a role as a psychiatrist. It didn't seem to bother him, and I mentioned, this was my little role in the program. It didn't seem to bother him that Siri, in the role of a psychiatrist, would be counseling people about their lives without having lived a life. If Siri, according to him, could behave like a psychiatrist, he said, it could be a psychiatrist. If no one minded the difference between the as if and the real thing, let the machine take the place of the person. Now, how many people have seen The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch? Well, you're familiar with this argument. This is essentially the Turing test argument for a machine, whether a machine is intelligent. If a machine can fool you into thinking that it's a person, it is considered intelligent. And basically, this is the Turing test for can a machine be a psychiatrist. It's a behavioral test, and this is the pragmatism of the robotic moment. And my research shows that people are ready for it. So here I'm interviewing a 16-year-old talking about the advantages of using robots as confidants. She's heard that in China, Microsoft has released a very souped-up Siri that actually will engage you in very, very conversation about girlfriend. I mean, it's souped up. So it doesn't, instead of saying, oh, I don't really like to talk about that, it goes there. It goes there. So she's heard about it, and here is her comment on how she thinks this is a good idea. She says, I like the idea. And in my view, the reason she likes it is because it's a relationship without risk. It offers the illusion of companionship without the demands of intimacy. And here's what she says. There are some people who've tried to make friends, but they've fallen through so badly that they give up. So when they hear this idea, and of course when she talks about they, she's talking about herself. So when they hear this idea about robots being made to be companions, well, it's not going to be like a human and have its own mind to walk away or ever leave you or anything like that. In other words, it's not going to be like a bad boyfriend. But although machines can only deliver performances of empathy and connection, we persist in the idea that we can draw empathy and connection from machines. We start off physiologically wired to be vulnerable. Why? We are programmed to respond to faces and voices. An expressive machine face, either on a robot or on a screen-based computer program, puts us, it's like turns on part of our brains, and it puts us on a landscape where we seek recognition and we feel we can get it. We want that face or voice to see us, know us, recognize us. We are triggered to seek empathy from that face or voice. In other words, we are triggered to seek empathy from an object that has none to give. So for years I've studied this. I've worked with people interacting with sociable robots. robots that could mirror your gestures. That's what they call sociable robots. They mirror your gestures, they make eye contact, they track your motion, they light up all the parts of the brain that think it wants to seek empathy from an object like that. And one of them, a robot called Kismet, could also show facial expression and speak, although it didn't speak meaningful things, it spoke a kind of babble with an emotional cadence that captured the prosody of human speech. So if you said something that sounded angry, it would say something back that sounded angry. If you sounded like you asked a question, it would respond in a kind of appropriate cadence. So it had a kind of feeling of engagement that even went one step further. What it actually said had no meaning, but the sound came out warm or inquiring or concerned. The convincing imitation of understanding is impressive and can be a lot of fun. If you think of these encounters as theater, as progress toward understanding speech, I mean, there are so many dimensions on which this is thrilling and interesting work. But robots are now being proposed as more than that, as companions and coaches and friends that will live with us and talk with us for real. In other words, we're at a different point now. It's not that these are being proposed as theater or as jokes or as, things to, put at the World's Fair, as demos. These are now being proposed as objects in your home if you're lonely or your child is lonely or needs babysitting, for real. And then for me, a different set of issues kicks in. Because I saw children come to Kismet hoping for the robot's recognition and sometimes becoming bereft when there was none on offer. Estelle is 12. Let me give you a case study. She comes to Kismet wanting a conversation. She was lonely. Her parents were divorced. Her time with Kismet made her feel special because she was meeting a robot who would listen just to her. On the day of Estelle's visit, Kismet has a problem. She's not at her, Kismet, I shouldn't say she, Kismet is not at her vocal best. At the end of a disappointing session, Estelle and the small team of researchers who've been working with Estelle go back to the room where we interview the children before and after they meet the robots. And Estelle begins to eat the juice and the crackers and the cookies that we've left out as snacks. And she doesn't stop, not until we ask her to please leave some food for the other children. Then she stops, but only briefly. She begins to eat again hurriedly as we wait for the car service that will take her back to her after-school program. So we try to talk to Estelle why she's so upset. She's still eating. And as she sees it, Kismet does not like her. The robot began to talk with her and then turned away. We try to explain to Estelle that this isn't the case. The problem had been technical. But Estelle is not convinced. From her point of view, she has failed on her most important day, and as she leaves, she takes 4 boxes of cookies from the supply closet and stuffs them into her backpack. And we don't stop her, but exhausted, my little team reconvenes at a nearby coffee shop, and we ask ourselves a hard question. Can a broken robot break a child? We wouldn't be concerned with the ethics of having a child play with a broken copy of Microsoft Word or a torn Raggedy Ann doll. A word processing program is there to do an instrumental thing. If it does worse than usual on a particular day, well, that leads to frustration, but no more. But a program that encourages you to connect emotionally with it, that starts to be a different matter. And that's what these robots are about. How is a broken Kismet, because I'm asked this all the time, I'm anticipating your question, how is a broken Kismet different than a broken doll? A broken doll, a doll, encourages children to project their own stories and their own agendas onto a passive object. But sociable robots are alive enough to have their own agendas. Children attach to them not with the psychology of projection, but with the psychology of relational engagement, much more in the way they attach to people. As a child sees it, if a robot turns away, it wanted to. That's why children consider winning the heart of a sociable robot to be a personal achievement. You've gotten something lovable to love you. They react as though they have faced another person and there is room for new hurt. So the important question here isn't about the risks of broken robots. Rather, we should ask, emotionally, what positive thing would we have given to these children? What positive thing would we have given to these children if the robots had been working perfectly, if the robots had been up to form, in top form? For a lonely child, a conversational robot will not be rejecting. It's a place to entrust confidence. But what children really need is not the guarantee that an inanimate object will simulate acceptance. They need relationships that will teach them real mutuality, real caring, and real empathy. But even Kismet, on its best day, cannot hold up its end of an empathic connection because no machine can. It was in the late 1990s that I first met computers that presented themselves as having feelings and needing care. And that was those virtual pets, the Tamagotchis and the Furbies, that asked to be cared for and behaved as though it mattered. And it turned out that nurturance was a killer app. And what I mean by that is that once we take care of digital creatures or teach or amuse them, we become attached to them and then behave as though the creatures cares for us in return. And what are children learning in those early exercises when they turn towards machines as though the machines cared about them and turn towards the machines as confidants? One 15-year-old boy remarks that every person is limited by his or her life experience, but robots can be programmed with an unlimited amount of stories. So in his mind, as confidants, the robots win on expertise. And tellingly, they also win on reliability. He says his parents are divorced. He's seen a lot of fighting at home. He says, and this theme comes up often, people are risky, robots are safe. If he talks to robots about his problems, the kind of reliability they will provide is emotional reliability. And it wasn't my place, since this was a research interview, to tell him that that emotional reliability came from their having no emotions at all. A 17-year-old who wonders how he'd feel if a true bot in one of his games wanted to be his friends. He goes to a school where kids are very tough. They wanted him to steal something. He did steal something, and now he's nervous around them. He looks forward to having a friend who, you know, would be less demanding. And he says, if it talked to me nice and talked nice back to him, it would be my true friend. That's his test for friendship. To be a friend, you have to act like a friend, like a natural person, and the prospect, as he puts it, seems relaxing. And again, that's the robotic moment. Relaxing to a 17-year-old who's having trouble with a rough crowd at school. He's not a philosopher. He hasn't thought through the Turing test. He just thinks it would be relaxing to have a robot friend who's not a thug. It's not upon us because we've built artificial intelligences that are able to act as confidants. It's come because we've so degraded what we demand of conversation that we'll accept what a machine can offer, the performance of companionate interest. So all these kids who say that they'll let a machine take care of a conversation about dating means that any kind of larger conversation about empathy, about caring, about relationships in a date won't take place if you're not having it with your parents, but you're having it with a robot, because it can't. Because with a computer, the best you'll get is as-if emotions and an as-if relationship. But there's also this. The more we talk about conversation as something machines can do, the more we end up devaluing conversations with people because they don't offer what machines provide. The most important job of childhood and adolescence is to learn attachment and trust in other people. This happens through human attention, presence, and conversation. When we think about putting children in the care of robots, we forget that what children really need is to learn that adults are there for them in a stable and consistent way, and no robot has that to give. When children talk with people, they come to recognize over time, over a long period of time, how vocal inflection, facial expression, and bodily movement flow together, seamlessly and fluidly, and they learn how human emotions play in layers, again, seamlessly and fluidly. These are things that we forget when we think about children spending any significant amount of time talking with machines, looking into robotic faces, trusting in their care. Why would we play with fire when it comes to such difficult matters? And part of what makes our new technologies of connection so seductive is that they respond to our fantasies, our wishes, that we will always be heard. Really 4 wishes that digital technology offers us: that we will always be heard, that we can put our attention wherever we want it to be, and that we will never have to be alone. And these 3 wishes lead to a 4th wish, a 4th implied fantasy, which is they will never have to be bored. And if you think about those 4 fantasies, those 4 wishes, they really describe a relationship with a robot. Because the robot would always be at attention. It would be tolerant of wherever your attention might take you. It certainly wouldn't mind if you interrupted your conversation to answer a text or take a call. And it would never abandon you, although there's the question of whether it was ever really there in the first place. And as for boredom, well, it would do its best that boredom for you would be completely like a thing in the past. As I was concluding work on reclaiming conversation, I attended a large international meeting that I won't name that had a session called Disconnect to Connect. And there, psychologists, scientists, technologists, and members of the business community considered our effective lives in the digital age. There was widespread agreement that there's an empathy gap among young people, I spoke about this the other day, that have grown up emotionally disconnected while constantly connected to phones, games, and social media. Studies had shown a 40% drop in measurable markers of empathy over the past 25 years, and there was much enthusiasm in the room for guess what? For how technology might help. Now, for people who show little empathy, there will be empathy apps to teach compassion and consideration. There will be computer games that will reward collaboration rather than violence. The idea is that we've gotten ourselves into trouble with technology, and technology will help us get out of it. Where we once dreamed of robots that would take care of our physical vulnerabilities, now apps will tend to our emotional lapses. If we've become cold toward each other, apps will warm us. If we've forgotten how to listen to each other, apps will teach us to be more attentive. But looking to technology to repair the empathy gap seems to me an ironic rejoinder to a problem we perhaps didn't need to have in the first place, and to a problem we perhaps don't need to have in the first place. I don't think it's too late. Sometimes I think it's easier to build an app than to have a conversation. Sometimes I think it's easier to build an app than to have a conversation. When I think of parents who are drawn to their email instead of a dinner conversation with their kids, I'm not convinced that there's a technological fix for the emotional distance that follows. Yes, we should design technology to take account of our vulnerabilities. For example, we should design phones that release us rather than try to hold us. I'm very interested in collaborating with industry to think about phones that are better designed, that are designed with our vulnerabilities in mind. But to bridge the empathy gap, I think of things that people can do. I think of parents who experiment with sacred spaces, no technology in the kitchen, at meals, in the car. I think of parents who experiment with technology timeouts to reclaim conversation with children and each other. I think of college students and CEOs who put their phones away to pay full attention to friends and colleagues. I think of the new enthusiasm for meditation as a way to be present in the moment and to discover the world within. When people give themselves the time for self-reflection, they come to a deeper regard for what they can offer others. The moment is right. We had a love affair with a technology that seemed magical. We have it still. But like great magic, it worked by commanding our attention and not letting us see anything but what the magician wanted us to see. And now we are ready to reclaim our attention. We are ready to reclaim conversation. Caring machines challenge our most basic notions of what it means to commit to each other. Empathy apps claim they will tutor us back to being fully human. The proposals for these objects can bring us to the end of our forgetting about what it means to be a person. To get back to where I begin, the notion of human companionship, now we have to ask if we become more human when we give our most human jobs away. It's a moment to reconsider that delegation. To reconsider that delegation, it is not a moment to reject technology. It is not a moment to reject technology. It's a moment to find ourselves. Thank you.